Christian Whitehead is unprofessional at times. So I'm going to constructively criticize today some of the missteps that got him to where he is now at this point in his career in the gaming community. So in part 1 of this video, we'll just quickly establish who Christian Whitehead is. And in part 2 of this video, we'll explore the ways that Evening Star can improve. There were some unforced errors along the way in the lead up to Penny and the road to its release. And you're going to come away from this video with a great many constructive takeaways to make sure that the rough learning experiences that Christian Whitehead had on the job are not things that the next generation of gamers are going to have to stumble through and bang their heads against the wall, making a lot of the same mistakes. And finally, in part 3 of this video, I will be delivering Christian Whitehead his sentencing, which will be similar to the sentencing for Matty Thorson, as a straightforward, needed antidote for indie auteur hubris. So let's dive right into part 1, people, which is a quick intro section about who Christian Whitehead is, in case anyone didn't know. You probably know him primarily for having been the developer of Sonic Mania, which came out in 2017. Prior to that, Mr. Whitehead created the Retro engine, which was used to create the mobile ports of Sonic 1 and 2 and CD in the early 2010s. Now, prior to that, Christian Whitehead made his bones and rose to prominence in the Sonic community for having made a Sonic fan game or two. Sonic Nexus, maybe the one you've heard of, Retro Sonic. Now, did Sonic Mania beat Sega at their own game? When Sonic Mania came out, it was heralded as the second coming of Sonic. It was what we had wanted for all those years and decades. And it's fair enough to say that Sonic Mania totally crushed Sonic 4, blew it out of the water in terms of a head-to-head matchup of the two games' quality. But Sega could have made a Sonic Mania-style game at any time. They chose not to. That just wasn't the design philosophy they wanted to pursue. And so to say that Sonic Mania ran circles around Sega and beat them at their own game, it can be tempting to emerge with that takeaway, but it's not quite as simple as that. So now that I've reminded you who Christian Whitehead is, let's talk about how his career panned out after Sonic Mania. He grabbed the brass ring, became famous overnight for Sonic Mania. The world was his oyster to conquer. But what did he do? He did not strike when the iron is hot. That was his first unforced error. It took like 7 years from the release of Mania to produce a game, Penny's Big Breakaway. Now, as an emblematic starting point, recall my music theory video for Sonic Mania. Why Sonic Mania music is so amazing. If you remember, there was a shot in that video where I poked some fun at Penny's Big Breakaway and Evening Star, even at one point having a visual graphic that poked fun at the fact that the day that Penny's Big Breakaway shadow dropped, which it was an unannounced sudden release, they also did an unannounced developer live stream. And so the live stream goes live with a hold screen that says, stream starting soon. So you're like, cool, this will be, you get to take a look at the devs playing the game Penny and talking about its development and design concepts. People are waiting and waiting. It takes nearly an hour for them to come on camera. So they didn't have their act together, and they passed the lack of planning onto you in the form of waiting. So it was funny that I got some backlash for doing that, for poking fun at that Penny stream in the Mania video, because really the only reason I did that was because Christian Whitehead poked fun at Sega for the Sonic Mania reveal stream, which if you were there, and many of you were there, witnessing living history, that Sonic Mania reveal stream, the first 10-15 minutes or so, there was a prominent, inexplicable beep that was just beeping for 10-15 minutes, and so you can hear that beat at the end of Studiopolis Zone, and on the screen it has the date of the exact Sonic Mania reveal stream with the infamous Totino plugs and the inconvenient long beep. So if you guys thought that I was being petty for poking fun at the Penny stream, I disagree as a starting point, but also it's no different than what Christian did. And I do think it's not a problem that Christian put that in Mania, but it can start to feel a little bit like Mr. Whitehead was just a little butthurt that the beeping was interrupting what was supposed to be his glorious promotional moment to reveal Sonic Mania. Now, I'm recording this live in the studio, and I got the audience on the other side of the plexiglass, and I can see their chats. Gaga Wombo says, sometimes I'll look through old forums and watch old videos and see mentions of the Taxman. And it feels so strange that the main developer of Mania was just some guy. Yes, and that is an awesome storybook rise to success story, but it's a double-edged sword. It comes with some complications. When you skip the line like that, grab the brass ring and become an overnight sensation, where you were just a Sonic fan game developer and now Sega is publishing your game that's like one of the best things that happened to Sonic in a great while, that skipping the line to superstardom without going through the typical industry processes and bureaucracies. I'm not saying that gatekeeping is required no matter what. It's just that, well, what happens? Christian Whitehead enters the video game industry with this prominent success of Sonic Mania, and if you ask me, I'm going to put forth the suggestion and possibility that that success kind of got to his head. He thought he could do no wrong, he was the talk of the town, and he thought that his audience of Sonic Mania gamers had perceived enough goodwill and interest in his creativity that they would follow him anywhere. And that may have fueled a hubris in Mr. Whitehead, where he felt that he just needed to be this visionary designer. He needed to undertake an ambitious project that was going to take some of the momentum and action philosophy of Sonic and do something new, in this case in 3D, but it's just not practical. They took about 3 years to come up with just the engine, and it was only after the engine was completed that they started sitting around and brainstorming like, okay, what kind of game are we going to make? So in retrospect, Mr. Whitehead bit off a little bit more than he could chew, because Penny is actually the first game that he's ever designed. Everything that came before Penny in Christian's resume was a Sonic concept game. Either a Sonic fan game or a mobile port, right? You look at his resume and there's nothing else. So up until that point, Christian leaned on the IP of Sonic, of the creative premise of Sonic. He only ever operated within that pre-existing playground. But coming up with your own radical new concept, that's a whole different skill set. Having a vision, coming up with a concept for a game that's going to connect with people and appeal to them, making a successful Sonic fan game does not guarantee success when you take a new stab at something innovative. And so with Penny's Big Breakaway's sales disaster, basically Christian Whitehead had his Windfall Island video moment. Remember when I made the music theory video about Windfall Island from Zelda the Wind Waker and it bombed? Well, that was because I was riding high on a bunch of successful music theory videos about Sonic, followed by a music theory video about Super Mario 64, and I was like, wow, I can even do a Mario game? People will follow me anywhere. They understand what the Alex Yard experience is, so they'll put faith in me and watch a video even on this less popular, less beloved Windfall Island song. The Windfall Island video was, all told, a viewership flop, and although it does definitely have its fans, it just did not have widespread appeal, and I own that. I own that mistake 100%. I learned the hard way that my audience was not necessarily going to follow me anywhere, and although plenty of people have seen the video and they still appreciate it, the fact is that was a failure and a learning experience. But what did I invest? How many chips did I push into the middle of the poker table to make that Windfall Island video? Well, it was pretty much about a month and a half to make that video. Okay, Christian Whitehead instead sunk 6 or 7 years into Penny, right? To go that long without producing something, without testing your product on the market to see if it gets results, and that's his first original IP. It was way too ambitious, the risks were too great, and it backfired. Evening Star had to downsize after the game debuted. We're going to get to that some more later. So if I've learned my lesson from the Windfall Island music theory video, and Christian has learned, perhaps too little too late, about the massive swing that Penny was, well, now you're looking forward to T. Lopes. He has stated that he wants to develop a game. He's saying that although he's grateful to be able to do soundtracks for this or that game, Shredder's Revenge, Banana Kong 2, if you ask him, he's basically putting in his dues as a setup to one day rise to a plane where he can develop his own game. And although that is commendable and applaudable, it would behoove Mr. Lopes to get his feet wet with some smaller, less ambitious projects. And maybe he'd just work for someone else and do something related to game design. Not being the head honcho or director, but just getting some of that practical field experience, so that when he can make mistakes and grow as a game developer, it's in the context of his small participation in someone else's overall project, rather than, okay, I'm going out on my own, I'm going to pioneer this new game because my creative vision, that goal I have of releasing a game for other people to play, that's his singular focus. That comes at a risk, people. So is T. Lopes going to sit down to brainstorm the game that he wants to make only once he gets seed money for funding? I would recommend to aspiring creators that you should only make a game if the idea, concept, and passion for what you want to make comes bursting out of you, unasked. If any of you out there truly do want to take the big risk of investing a lot of your professional time and resources into a video game, which operates in an industry that is extremely crowded and saturated, it should come from the heart. You should have an idea already of what you want to do. And so this ties into Christian Whitehead because some, including Noah Lee, over at Thus Spoke Noah Lee, who did a fair, constructive criticism review of Penny's Break with that awesome outfit, his take on the matter, and this might be somewhat speculative, but the way that he perceives it, the way it shook out, that he thinks that Christian Whitehead was fully expecting to work on the next Sonic game, the project that went on to become Sonic Superstars. Noah Lee suggests that Christian Whitehead was so set on making that next Sonic game that he had no plan B. He thought he deserved the job, and it couldn't be anyone else. And so when talks fell through for Christian to work on what became Sonic Superstars, Noah Lee would say that they kind of had to scramble to make Penny's Break. And so whenever I hear that established quote by Mr. Whitehead saying, we always knew that we wanted to do a new IP in 3D, it starts to sound like he's interested in the idea of being a developer, the status of it, but he doesn't have a specific idea that he's ready to contribute yet. He just knows that he wants to do one. Kind of like the classic tale of Austin McConnell, who just got it in his head that he really wanted to make a movie and lost sight of putting together a film project that actually had something to say or contribute. So about that failed negotiation for what could have been Christian Superstars. Instead, it was Arzest Superstars, Oshima Superstars. But Iizuka acknowledged that talks to greenlight another Sonic project with Evening Star fell through, didn't work out. Evening Star even put together at least one prototype to experiment with what that next Sonic game could be. Now, when you look at Christian's comments about why things didn't work out, I believe him when he says that he's still on good terms with Sega. But given that he even went so far as to create a prototype to submit to Sega for approval to greenlight a project, it starts to sound a little bit disingenuous that he would try to just brush it off as, we always knew we wanted to make a 3D original IP. And so the alternate explanation that some have suggested as a way to rectify the conflicting information provided is that the reason for the impasse, as I alluded to in the Sonic Mania music theory video, was cash. It was compensation. That perhaps Sega was ready to greenlight a project, but when it came to draft up a contract for how much Evening Star would be compensated for a new Sonic project game, that it just wasn't enough, and Sega, perhaps, in this theory, was not willing to budge, and that's why things fell through. Well, as I said in the Sonic Mania music theory video, working for inadequate pay on an official Sonic game is an investment in your own relevance. Okay, so if Sega tried to lowball Christian, that's unfortunate on one level, but Sega has every right to do that.
Lowball might not even be the right term for what happened here. That word implies some sort of sleazy injustice, but it could just be as simple as Sega deciding, here's how much we're willing to pay for a development team to develop a $60 Sonic game. Christian Whitehead may have been of the view that he needed more time, that he needed more money to provide for more development time, that he would not be able to put together a game of that scale within that short amount of time. So what did Sega do? They could have easily taken that same compensation proposal, bring it to Arzest Naoto Oshima and say, with this amount of compensation, can you develop a $60 game fast enough? And the answer was yes, and perhaps there were some cut corners, cut content, quasi-unfinished game Sonic Superstars, but that's something that Arzest and Oshima had that Christian doesn't. Experience developing games with efficiency. Budgetary resource efficiency. Most of Evening Star is based out of Los Angeles, which is one of the most expensive places anywhere. Christian Whitehead and Evening Star have a ways to go before they are anywhere remotely competitive with Arzest. And even just that in itself indicates that Christian was not the right person for the job of Superstars. So that can actually provide Christian and a lot of other people some solid peace of mind that it wasn't meant to be.
Christian Whitehead is not entitled to get further work from Sega. Now, when you look at the way Christian Whitehead expresses himself creatively, you almost get the sense that Christian just has this entitlement in his head that it should be him. Sonic Mania was amazing. It reinvigorated the Sonic series. Everyone loves it, and everyone wants more. Sega would be crazy not to hire me. Hire this man, me. And so it's not hard to imagine that Mr. Whitehead would draw some resentment from this entire sequence of events. And part of why I get that sense is by looking at the game, Penny's Big Breakaway itself. There does seem to be some kind of passive-aggressive, petty jabs at Sega, because if you look at the very premise and plot and characters of Penny's Big Breakaway, Emperor Eddie does appear to be the blatant stand-in for Sega. Emperor Eddie, aka Sega, has been the only one at the reins, not letting anyone else perform. That's an allusion to not really letting some of the smaller studios create games for them. They just want to maintain all their control, and they don't release games as often anymore as they did back in the DIMS era. So for Christian to add this thinly veiled dialogue jabbing at Sega because, oh yeah, Eddie's act has gotten stale, it's only been him for a good while. And then you look at the cutscene that triggers the story of the whole game. It's Penny coming to the Royal Palace to do a performance, aka Sonic Mania. But then what ends up happening is that Sonic Mania runs circles around Eddie, runs circles around Sega, makes Sega look bad because now Sonic Mania is receiving all these glowing reviews and saying that Sonic Mania has beat Sega at their own game. And so Penny's yo-yo has run circles around Eddie, shed almost all of his clothes so he's down to his underpants, as if to suggest that Sega is the emperor with no clothes, and they're being too stubborn by lowballing Evening Star for the Superstars project. I mean, there's even dialogue that says, "This is my chance to be a gala superstar." And so if the compensation lowball could have been the underlying reason why talks fell through to greenlight a project, well, what is Penny the character gonna do now? Break away, go independent, leave those corporate overlords, and create a new original IP to find your audience, find a new audience, since that's a running theme in Penny's Big Breakaway. So this is what it comes down to. If Christian Whitehead truly believes that he's worth more than what Sega offered, well then he should have an accurate perception of his own market value. If you honestly think that you're that valuable that Sega should have compensated you more, if that's what it's all came down to, then you should take your talents to the free market and make a successful game that is financially viable as a product. Sega doesn't need Evening Star. Evening Star desperately needed Sega. And so although Christian seems to have some kind of this entitlement that he should be the one at the driver's wheel, we can erase all his unease and resentment about a perceived injustice.
Christian should not be blindsided or resentful about this situation because it's already been depicted in a major motion picture.
500 Days of Summer, because the dynamic between those two and that couple is very similar in important ways to Christian and Sega. You see, in that movie, Joseph Gordon-Levitt really likes Zooey Deschanel, wants to be with her, and she kind of does like him in return, but not enough to do a full-on canon relationship. They're just kind of respectful friends with benefits with no long-term contracts. And so when her feelings for Joseph Gordon-Levitt fade, he's left heartbroken. But he doesn't really have any grounds to say that it was unjust or unfair. She never committed to any serious thing, certainly not a long-term relationship or marriage. And so I draw that connection because Christian Whitehead had to aggressively court Sega in order to have them let him do those mobile ports and eventually Mania. And look, as a starting point, you can absolutely give Christian a lot of credit for somehow persuading Sega to let him make Mania as an official published game. But since he was only able to get Sega to oblige under significant reluctance, he should have came to the table with Sega for Superstars negotiations with that same mindset. But instead, he walked in as a foregone conclusion that he would be the one for the job, at a price that he decided. But if you're aggressively courting Sega like that, they have every right and within the realm of decency to compensate you what they think is fair based on how much they need you. And Sega does not need Christian Whitehead. And so Evening Star got let go to drift away in the wind, just like Zooey Deschanel eventually relieved Joseph Gordon-Levitt of his friends with benefits duties and status. And so when I look at what Mr. Whitehead did next, once Sonic Superstars was finally revealed, word started getting around. People were just directly saying, it's going to be a direct translation of the retro engine physics. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's significant and cool, but do you have a source for that? And as I trace down a source, what I get to is very merely Christian Whitehead's retweet of someone who posted a side-by-side clip comparison showing the similar physics between Superstars and the retro engine. And Christian Whitehead didn't even say anything in his retweet. He only put, and it pains me to say this, a thumbs up emoji. Talking in pictures, couldn't bring himself to say anything other than, yup, thumbs up, good retro physics, guys. And so that lack of precision, not using any English words, but just putting a thumbs up picture, it's just very incomplete and imprecise. And as someone who really enjoyed Mania and was looking forward to whatever was going to happen next, Superstars or otherwise, I think that the community deserved more than just a single emoji. That almost seems slightly passive-aggressive, that Mr. Whitehead could not even bring himself to say anything and just give a quick, ostensible stamp of approval, if that. And so, as Sonic Superstars fell through, that brought us to Penny's Big Breakaway, which took a good 6 or 7 years after Mania to materialize. You gotta strike when the iron is hot, and they most certainly did not. It was far too much of a romanticized, impractical way of just, we just have to follow our heart, make the game that we want to make, and the rest will figure itself out. We'll find our audience as long as we're true to our own creative game expression. Okay, but then you get to early 2024, and with a vague announcement that it would come out at some point in the winter, it was just shadow dropped. Okay, here it is. The game is, you can buy it now. It's $30, and it's unfinished. There's still plenty of bugs. Now, this is another one of those moments where you provoke me, Evening Star. I don't want to have to constructively criticize you and put you on blast, but when you take your leisurely time coming up with this fancy engine, and only once that engine is done, now you're sitting around brainstorming what idea you're going to even have for your game, to go through all of that auteur indulgence, and yet still taking your leisurely time, you still release the game in a rushed, unfinished state. This seems to be a game development company that is operating myopically, operating one step at a time with tunnel vision, with a protracted development cycle that was plagued with challenges and roadblocks that there's no reason they couldn't have anticipated it because they got too ambitious and wouldn't work within their means. So now, what is the ripple effect of those development errors? Now they are going to pass that error onto gamers themselves, and not just any gamers, but the gamers who deserve it least, which are your biggest fans. The fans who were going to buy the game on day one pretty much no matter what, right? You had a guaranteed purchase from a certain amount of Sonic fans, and it's those people that suffered the worst. Those people who paid the highest price that will ever be offered for that game on day one, and now your biggest, most faithful fans are going to have their core gameplay experience in those initial days be plagued with bugs. It's ridiculous. How can a game that you took such sweet time on be released in such an unfinished state? And this is a game that is primarily centered around combos, chaining different moves together. And you're going to give your biggest fans the maddening frustration of getting into a great flow state as you finally start to find your way with the controls, and then any given combo can just be up and interrupted for no reason because jank. If Evening Star was run so poorly that they so desperately needed some initial revenue that prompted them to shadow drop the game in a way that just felt very hasty and impulsive with no real master plan or professionalism to detect, well, all of these things are clear enough in themselves. And I might not have had any impetus to speak up about it in a video like I'm doing now, except that, as I alluded to, Evening Star, since the failure of Penny, has done anything but take responsibility. So let's read a statement or two that came out of Evening Star in the wake of Penny's dramatically unsuccessful sales performance. Hunter Bridges was quoted as saying, and I quote, "Unfortunately, due to volatile market conditions in the games industry and operational realities of our business, Evening Star is having to part ways with 6 team members from our Penny's Big Breakaway development team. We're a small, independent, privately owned company, and our only shareholders are ourselves, the co-founders. We have never taken outside investment. The volatile market conditions have a direct effect on us. We have done all we can to retain staff, but don't have infinite money. So, what on earth could be referenced here about volatile market conditions? That just kind of feels like they're pointing at some big vague boogeyman as a scapegoat. The closest thing that I could even possibly think of as a possible volatile market condition is like COVID, but it's 2025 right now. Penny came out in early 24. The pandemic's lockdown had all but wrapped up by that point. So what sort of volatile market conditions explain Penny's profoundly underwhelming sales numbers? Like, did the total amount of money spent by societies on video games suddenly shoot down? Like, what could even be referenced here? I don't know anything about a volatile market, but how about a saturated market? An absurdly crowded market. It is 2025 as of this recording, and there's a billion games. Everything's been done. The Simpsons did it. South Park did it. You really have to ask yourself, what kind of game premise or mechanic or character, what's going to really offer someone something if you want to get attention, if you want to make a splash? That's not what Evening Star did, because Evening Star's own website
featured the following mission statement. Evening Star is a boutique game studio founded in late 2018. Headquartered in Los Angeles with operations in Melbourne and London, Evening Star's mission is designing fresh, fun games which will stand the test of time. For Evening Star, being a boutique game studio has a specific meaning. Every member pursues a goal to make their own great games. By encouraging strong technical foundations in every discipline, members are given a voice and latitude to impact games in unique ways. Okay, so games is plural here, but they've only made one, so that's got to mean that every member of the Penny team had equal latitude with that Valve-style equal democracy where everyone has a creative voice and contribution. But this says everything about Evening Star's ivory tower self-indulgent approach. They're just in the lab saying, if I make the game that I really want to make and I'm passionate about, we're a boutique studio, so we don't have to answer to corporate overlords that are gonna corporatize our game. We can have pure creative free expression and creativity, and they think that, oh, we just be a boutique game studio that way, the rest will take care of itself. We will find our audience because we're offering something that the corporate companies can't provide. So Evening Star looks at the positive critic reviews of Penny's Big Breakaway, and then right then and there they're like, okay, we did our part, we succeeded. They think the only reason they failed is because of the saturated market, that if they had done something of this caliber 10 years ago, it would have found enough of an audience to sustain Evening Star. But in this instance, Evening Star is engaging only with a limited slice of the realities of game development. You cannot participate in the reality of game development selectively. You have to be practical about the business aspect, not just doing your own personal passion project, but balancing that against the practical application of creating a product to be sold on the market for a price.
So this game's failure should be a massive reality check for any aspiring game developers, is that if you're trying to sink or swim in the gaming world, competition is extremely stiff. And so if you want your game to connect with audiences, you gotta truly know your audience, understand the market in which you're operating. Coming up with a game that you personally are super passionate about is not the only aspect that's required.
I learned my lesson with the Windfall Island music theory video, which I'm extremely proud of and passionate about, as are the many Zelda fans who really enjoyed it, but that's only one piece of the equation. But Evening Star was not ready to learn from this and come out of it with the right takeaway until today. If Evening Star wants to understand the cause and effect of how the market responded to their game,
and I think you should look no further than the case study of me, Alex Yard. I am all about Sonic. I love Sonic Mania. I was the #1 prime demographic for this game, but I didn't buy it because this is a game that appears to be designed by committee, sort of random, and doesn't really have an identity because you're doing so many random things and being chased by penguins, and the QuickTime events at the end of the level. I'm not even going to talk about those, but QuickTime events are just a mini project you do in a game design class. It's not something something that I would contribute $30 toward purchasing. All that happened here is you were totally out of touch with the market that you were courting. But everything that Noah Lee talks about in his review is the exact impression I got from Penny's marketing that led me to the very easy choice not to buy Penny's big breakaway. So I've not made this video just for the sake of dunking. I'm doing this because Penny's road to retail was laden with unforced errors and hubristic overambition that I want to make sure that aspiring game developers, people who make Sonic fan games, and hope to perhaps make their own game someday, just like T. Lopes wants to, understand that the goal and dream that you're pursuing is an extremely tall order. It's like trying to be a successful actor in Hollywood. So if you're going to take such a big stab at this wing and a prayer industry, you got to be practical, realistic about it, and crawl before you can walk. The only way you can learn to do something well is by doing it again and again so many times, so you have those learning experiences and smaller stakes experiments and projects. But people in the comments section of Penny videos who tried to defend what Penny was attempting to be will say that, oh, well, Penny was always supposed to be just a niche game. It was never supposed to light up the sales charts. It's like, okay, but clearly whatever revenue Evening Star intended to get from Penny, they didn't get. And the volatile market just seems like a total cop-out to deflect responsibility. So since it will be very easy for the next generation of game developers to learn the lessons of what landmines to avoid that Evening Star unnecessarily crashed up upon, we have now arrived at part 3 of this video, where I will now be delivering Christian Whitehead his sentencing, which will specify what he and Evening Star need to do in order to atone for this situation. Christian Whitehead and Evening Star at large, I hereby sentence you to go work for someone else. Contract out your services, table your visionary hubristic auteur philosophy because you took your big swing and you're not getting another one right now. That market that you describe as volatile has all but rejected you. And it's not some injustice or unfortunate timing. There's just the inevitable crawl forward into the future where everything in gaming has been done and then some. No more 6-year learning experiences. A learning experience should be like a half a year or a year. You undertake a 6-year project once you've gotten that learning under your belt. But when you mix video game education with the active development of actually making a game, the clumsy, short-sighted, romanticized manner in which you've navigated your career can at the very least serve as a deterrent for others to follow in your footsteps.
And if Evening Star and anyone watching this has only one takeaway from this video, it should be Los Angeles. No one has pointed that out before. It's notorious for being one of the most expensive places to live on planet Earth. It's Hollywood. Just ask AVGN when he made his angry video game nerd movie in LA. The supplemental costs were a nightmare. Just watch any Netflix show about struggling actors. They will comment on how expensive LA is. If your costs of living and operating in LA are putting you at a severe disadvantage, of course you're going to lose out on these contracts to companies like our Zest, who are a much more efficient machine with plenty of experience in what they do in 3D gaming, and you're just looking to roll into the gaming industry in a courtesy limousine, stumbling through multi-year learning experiences on Sega's dime? Come on with this. Christian Whitehead assembled a team mostly from scratch. Things didn't even work out for Walter White in Season 5 of Breaking Bad. He built a new team from scratch and hoped the rest would take care of itself. But even Breaking Bad was early on planning to film and be set in California. But then they got good tax breaks and cost efficiency benefits in New Mexico, baby. Are you guys seeing the connection? I accept your apology.
And I would have bitten my tongue except for the deflection of responsibility. I consider that deflection unprofessional and very selfish. I can look at the marketing and the premise of a game like Penny, and it does not surprise the mind at all that it fell flat on its face, and it all comes down to the fact that Christian designed a game for himself. And not just Christian, but also everyone else at Evening Star, because their design philosophy is, we make the games that we want to make. A lot of the people on the development team have like an equal democratic voice and vote as to how the game can proceed. It's like, if you're just going to create these games in a self-serving vacuum like that, you've got some gall to then turn around and blame a volatile market. You must instead, as the final part of your sentence, take steps to understand the market in which you operate, because clearly your expectations are tuned to a radically different frequency. And I think that you'll have so many more valuable, low-stakes learning experiences that will help you and also T. Lopes to one day properly determine when it's time to really buckle down and invest a ton of time, money, and risk into a 5-year project. One of the surest ways you can get to that point is by working for someone else. Don't think that you need to be the master visionary in charge of all of this. You will learn so much by working for other people. Contract out your services. Take different assignments, each of which do not totally occupy the entire studio for years on end. Maddie Thorson, the developer of Celeste, was similarly sentenced to go work for someone else after the unnecessary implosion of Earthblade, the attempted Celeste kind of follow-up. All of Earthblade's errors were preventable and could have been avoided if Maddie was more of a team player first before deciding to be a team showrunner. If Christian Whitehead and Maddie Thorson are one day able to create a new game that has legitimate market appeal beyond their own personal preferences and romantic ideas of what game development is, then I, Alex Yard, may be in the market to get it, because I really enjoyed Sonic Mania as well as Celeste. They're both unforgettable games, so both of these development studios have it in them to make something great, but they have to work within their means, have learning experience in lower stakes experiments, and then, only then, could they one day get the $30 of me, Alex Yard, here at 91.6 WAYZ, the Alex Yard Zone, Internet Terrestrial Radio. And so, all the gamers that are out there listening to this video right now, I do thank you for hearing what I have to say. And if you are reluctant to buy Penny's Big Breakaway, ideally some of my commentary today, as well as Noah Lee's video, provides constructive observations that make sense of Penny's flop, not as some volatile market tragedy, but as a direct cause and effect response of creating navel-gazing games in a protracted ivory tower. Good night, everybody!